The $5 bill was soft at the edges, the way money gets when it has passed through too many hands and seen too many hard days. Cora Sinclair sat in a plastic chair at the Columbus Greyhound Terminal at 2:47 in the morning and held that bill between her fingers like it was the last thing tethering her to the earth. Maybe it was. The fluorescent lights above her hummed and flickered, casting everything in the kind of yellow that made healthy people look sick. Around her, the terminal held a scattered handful of travelers slumped in their seats, faces hidden under jacket hoods and folded arms. Nobody looked at the two girls with garbage bags piled at their feet. Nobody ever did. Nora slept against Cora's shoulder, her breathing shallow and slightly off, that faint whistling sound that had become the background music of Cora's entire life. She knew that sound the way a sailor knows weather. She could tell by the pitch of it how bad the night was going to be. Tonight the pitch was manageable. Tonight they were okay. But the inhaler tucked in the front pocket of Nora's jacket had maybe 2 doses left, and after that, okay was going to become something else entirely. Cora was 17 years old. 3 days ago, she had walked out of St. Agatha's home for children in Columbus with her 14-year-old sister beside her and 2 black garbage bags between them. The state had decided that since Cora was the only living relative Nora had, and since Cora had just aged out of the system, the two of them could stay together. They had given Cora a folder of paperwork, directions to the nearest shelter, and a handshake from a caseworker who had already moved on to the next file before Cora reached the parking lot. The shelter had no beds. The shelter the caseworker directed them to, the one with the address printed on the top sheet of the folder, had no beds and hadn't had beds for 2 weeks. The woman at the front desk said this without apology. The way people say things they have said so many times, the words have lost all their weight. So they had come here, to the bus station, because the bus station was warm and open all night and nobody asked you to leave as long as you kept quiet and stayed out of the way. Cora had learned that years ago, in a different city, during a different bad stretch. Invisibility was a skill. She had gotten very good at it. She pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked from a fall she hadn't had time to worry about. The Wi-Fi in the terminal was slow and unreliable, but she had learned patience the same way she had learned invisibility, by necessity, over a long time, without anyone showing her how. She scrolled through listings, apartments, rooms, anything with 4 walls and a roof that cost less than nothing. Everything required deposits. Everything required income verification and credit checks and references, and 100 other things that existed in a world she had never been allowed to enter. She was about to put the phone away when the page loaded one more result at the bottom, half hidden beneath a banner ad for a storage unit company. It was a county auction listing, the kind that appeared when municipal governments needed to clear properties out of legal limbo. The thumbnail showed a building that looked like it had given up sometime during the Carter administration and never found a reason to try again. Abandoned roadside diner. Briarwood, Custer County, Montana. Starting bid $5. Buyer must claim keys in person within 14 days of auction close. Property sold as is. Contents included. No inspection available. Cora read it 3 times. Then she opened the full listing. The description was 8 sentences long. Former restaurant. Closed 15 years ago in 2009. County had been maintaining property tax payments to prevent the parcel from falling into a more complicated legal category. No interested buyers in multiple previous auction cycles. Building condition unknown. Land parcel included. She looked at the bid history. 14 days the auction had been running. Not a single bid. She looked at the $5 bill in her hand, then at the listing, then at Nora's face in the yellow terminal light, pale and still and trusting in the way that only sleeping people are trusting, with all their defenses down and all their hope unguarded on the surface. Montana was 2,000 miles from Columbus. It was November. She knew nothing about running a diner, nothing about Montana, nothing about what 15 years of abandonment did to a building. She knew it was probably falling apart. She knew it was probably a mistake. But she had $5 and a sister with 2 doses of inhaler left and nowhere in the world that wanted them. Her thumb pressed the bid button before she finished the thought. The confirmation came at 6:23 in the morning. Congratulations, winning bidder. Property parcel 7742, former Briarwood Diner. Final bid $5. Keys available at Custer County Clerk's Office, Briarwood, Montana. Claim within 14 days. Nora woke up 20 minutes later, blinking the sleep from her eyes, and Cora showed her the screen. Nora read it twice. Then she looked at her sister. Then she looked at the screen again. "We bought a diner," she said. "We bought something," Cora said. Nora thought about this for a moment. "Is it a good diner?" "I have no idea." Another pause. Nora nodded, the nod she reserved for things she had decided to believe in regardless of the evidence. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." The bus ride took 2 full days. They changed coaches 3 times, in Indianapolis, in Billings, and in a town so small Cora never caught its name. They slept sitting up, ate crackers from vending machines, drank water from bathroom sinks. Somewhere in Wyoming, the landscape changed in a way that felt permanent, the flat middle of the country giving way to something older and more serious. Mountains rising in the distance like they had been there long before anyone thought to name them, and would be there long after everyone stopped caring. Nora pressed her face against the window for hours at a stretch. Her breathing stayed manageable. The air on the bus was dry, which sometimes helped. Cora watched her sister watch America roll past and tried not to calculate how many doses they had left. "What do you think it looks like?" Nora asked somewhere in the middle of Montana, the sky outside gone enormous and pale blue. "The diner?" "Our diner." Already she was calling it theirs. Already she was building a life there in her head, furnishing it with hope the way people furnish houses before the moving truck arrives. Cora looked out the window at the mountains. "I don't know," she said. "I guess we'll find out." Briarwood was the kind of town that appeared on maps but barely registered on them. Population 1,400, according to a sign at the edge of town that listed the figure without enthusiasm. The bus dropped them at a gas station on the main road. The town stretched a few blocks in either direction, storefronts that dated from the 50s and hadn't seen significant renovation since. A hardware store with a hand-lettered sign, a feed supply operation with bags stacked against the window, a small restaurant with red vinyl booths visible through glass that needed cleaning. The people on the sidewalk stopped to look at them. All of them. 2 teenage girls with garbage bags over their shoulders, stepping off a bus into a November morning cold enough to see your breath. Cora kept her eyes forward and walked like she belonged somewhere. She had been practicing that walk for 11 years. The Custer County Clerk's office was in a low brick building next to the post office. Inside, behind a counter stacked with manila folders and laminated notices, sat a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair pulled tight and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. Her name tag read, Winifred Yates, Deputy Clerk. She looked up when they came in. Something moved across her face, not quite concern, not quite surprise. Something that lived in the territory between those two things. "Can I help you girls?" Cora set the printout on the counter. "We're here to pick up the keys to the Briarwood Diner, parcel 7742. Winifred Yates looked at the printout, then at Cora, then at Nora, then back at Cora. "You're the winning bidder." "Yes, ma'am." A beat of silence. "How old are you?" 17. "And her?" 14. "She's my sister." Winifred Yates removed her glasses and set them on the desk. She looked at the two of them for a long moment with an expression Cora recognized from years of practice. It was the look people got when they saw something sad and didn't know whether to say so. "You understand what you're getting into," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "We understand it's been empty for 15 years. Edmund Hale closed those doors in 2009 and walked away and never looked back. Before that, the building sat for another season without much maintenance. Whatever condition it was in then, it's had 15 more years of Montana winters since." She paused. "You have family here? Somewhere to go if this doesn't work out?" "No, ma'am." Another pause, longer this time. Then Winifred Yates opened a drawer and retrieved a manila envelope. She held it for a moment before handing it over. "Property is 4 miles east on the old highway. Used to be a busy road before the interstate bypassed the county in 94. That's why the diner closed. Nobody coming through anymore." She pushed the envelope across the counter. "The keys are inside. Good luck to you both." They walked the 4 miles. The road was gravel past the edge of town, winding through farmland gone dormant for winter and stretches of pine forest where the wind came through sideways and cold. Their garbage bags were awkward over their shoulders. Nora didn't complain. She never did. Cora saw the sign first. It rose from the weeds beside the road, tilted at the angle of something that had been fighting gravity for a long time and was starting to lose. The neon tubing was dark and cracked, but the shape of the letters was still readable. Briarwood Diner, open 24 hours. Someone had nailed a piece of plywood over the 24 hours portion and painted the word closed on it, but the paint had weathered to almost nothing, a ghost of an announcement that had long since stopped mattering. Beyond the sign, set in the center of a gravel parking lot that had gone mostly to weeds and cracked pavement heaved by frost, the diner waited. It was smaller than Cora had imagined. One story, long and rectangular, with large windows across the front and a chrome trim along the roofline that had gone from silver to the dull gray of old pewter. The white paint was peeling in strips. The flat roof sagged slightly in the middle. One of the front windows had been boarded over at some point, but the walls were straight. The foundation was solid. When a gust came through the pine trees and hit the building broadside, nothing moved that shouldn't have. Nora took Cora's arm. "It's real," she said quietly. Cora pulled the envelope open. 2 brass keys on a plain ring, worn smooth from years of being handled. Her hands were steadier than she expected as she walked to the front door. The lock was stiff with years of disuse, but the key turned and the door swung inward with the long, resonant groan of something waking up after a very long sleep. The smell came first. Dust and old grease and wood that had been through too many seasons sealed inside. Something organic beneath that. Faint, possibly fabric rotting, possibly something smaller that had come inside and not found its way out. But beneath all of that, something else. Something Cora didn't have a word for. Not hope exactly, more like the memory of hope. The residue of a place that had once meant something to people and still carried that meaning in its walls, the way old wood carries the smell of what it once was. Late afternoon light came through the dusty windows in long golden shafts, illuminating everything in the soft amber of a photograph from decades ago. Motes of dust moved slowly in the disturbed air, turning in the light like they were grateful to be noticed after so many years of settling undisturbed. The layout was exactly what a diner should be. Booths lined the walls, red vinyl cracked but not split, the padding beneath still holding its shape. A long counter ran the length of the back wall, chrome stools bolted to the floor at even intervals. Behind the counter, a pass-through window opened into the kitchen beyond. At every table, salt and pepper shakers stood in their places. Menus were stacked near the register. Coffee cups sat upside down on a shelf near the coffee station, waiting to be filled by someone who hadn't come in 15 years. Everything was layered in dust. But under the dust, everything was there. Nothing had been taken, nothing had been vandalized. Whoever had closed this place had not abandoned it. They had preserved it, carefully, deliberately, as though they expected someone to return. Nora walked slowly down the center aisle, trailing one finger along the booth backs, leaving a clean line through 15 years of settled dust. Her eyes moved over everything with the focused attention she gave to things she was trying to memorize. "It's like a time capsule," she said. Cora went behind the counter. She opened cabinets and found plates wrapped in old newspaper, cups and saucers stacked in careful order, silverware in divided trays. She opened a drawer and found order pads, pencils, a rubber-banded stack of business cards for the diner. She opened another and found a small notebook filled with handwriting she didn't recognize, dense and careful, numbers and dates in neat columns. "Cora," Nora's voice from the far end of the counter. "Come look at this." It was a photograph, mounted in a simple wooden frame on the wall. Black and white, slightly faded, but the image still clear. A man in military dress uniform stood in front of the diner, one hand resting on the hood of a pickup truck that had been new sometime in the 1970s. He was young in the photo, mid-20s maybe, with the posture of someone who had been trained to stand straight and had never stopped. His expression was serious in the way that people are serious when they are trying not to smile, because the moment feels too important for smiling. But the pride was there anyway, right at the surface, unmistakable. Below the photo, a small brass plate. Edmund Hale, 1978, opening day. Cora looked at the photograph for a long time. The man who had built this place, the man who had closed it and walked away. She wondered what the distance between those two moments had looked like from the inside. The kitchen was larger than the dining room suggested. Commercial grade, the kind of equipment that was built when built meant something that would last. A steel griddle ran along one wall, flanked by fryers that had been drained and covered with care. Industrial refrigerators stood with their doors propped open. Interiors dark and silent. A prep station with cutting boards still in place. A dishwashing area with a deep commercial sink. Shelving along every wall loaded with pots and pans and equipment Cora didn't have names for yet, but intended to learn. Dusty, but intact. Complete in a way that felt intentional. If we can get the equipment running, Nora said, and then she stopped. She looked at Cora. I mean, I know what you mean. They stood in the middle of the kitchen in the last of the afternoon light and let the possibility of it settle over them. Two girls who had never run anything, who owned nothing, who had arrived here with $5 and two garbage bags and no plan beyond the one that had gotten them through the door. That was when Cora noticed the floor. Most of the kitchen was covered in standard commercial tile, off-white, scuffed from decades of foot traffic. But in one corner, partially hidden behind the largest of the refrigerators, the tile was different. Newer, cleaner, a slightly different shade of white. The grout lines still defined instead of worn smooth, the way the rest of the floor had been worn smooth by years of people moving through the same paths over and over. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked at Nora. Help me move this. The refrigerator was empty and had been for years, but it was still heavy, built for permanence rather than convenience. They pushed together, bracing their feet against the older tile, and slowly the refrigerator scraped clear of the corner, revealing the floor beneath. The newer tile extended about 4 feet in each direction, and in the center of it, set flush with the surface, was a metal handle, the kind you'd find on a hatch or a door set into a floor, dark with age but smooth from use. Nora's breath caught. Cora knelt down. The handle was cool and solid in her grip. She pulled. Nothing. She adjusted, got both hands on it, pulled harder. There was a click, a release of pressure built up over years of sealed air, and then the tile section lifted away, hinged on one side, revealing a dark opening beneath the kitchen floor. A staircase dropped into darkness below. Cool, dry air drifted up from the opening, carrying a smell that was completely unlike the rest of the building. Clean, still, like a room that had been sealed away from time and was waiting, patient and certain, to be opened. Cora took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. She looked at Nora. Nora looked back at her with the expression she had when she was trying to look calm and not quite succeeding. Cora went down first. The stairs were concrete, solid, well-built, each step uniform and level. 8 steps down and she reached the floor of a room that was far larger than anything the kitchen above suggested could exist beneath it. The ceiling was 8 feet high, supported by thick concrete pillars spaced at regular intervals. The walls were concrete block, smooth and sealed, and on metal shelving units that lined every wall from floor to ceiling, arranged with a precision that reminded Cora of photographs she had seen of military supply depots, were supplies. She moved the flashlight slowly across the inventory. Canned goods by the hundreds, labels facing out, organized by category with the methodical care of someone who thought in systems. Cases of bottled water stacked 4 high. Medical supplies in sealed packages, still in their original boxes, dates checked and rotated. Blankets and sleeping bags in vacuum-sealed plastic. Portable stoves and fuel canisters. Batteries sorted by size in labeled bins. Flashlights, both battery and hand crank, hung on dedicated hooks. A shortwave radio on a dedicated shelf with its manual beside it. Tools, hand and power both, hung on pegboard with their outlines marked behind them so you could tell at a glance what was missing. In one corner, a generator, large and professionally installed, connected by conduit to what appeared to be a ventilation system built into the ceiling. Fuel containers in a separate metal cabinet nearby, properly stored according to every safety standard Cora could think of. This was not a basement. This was not a root cellar or a storm shelter improvised from what someone had on hand over a weekend. This had been built with intention, planned on paper before the first shovel of dirt was turned, constructed over years, added to over decades, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had a very clear idea of what they were preparing for, even if that idea was simply this, that someday someone would need it. Nora had come down the stairs behind her. She was turning slowly in the middle of the room, the flashlight on her phone adding its beam to Cora's, the two of them sweeping light across shelf after shelf of carefully organized provision. "Cora," she said, "what is this place?" "I don't know yet." Then Nora said, "There's a desk." It was tucked against the far wall, A metal desk of the kind that used to furnish offices everywhere, before everything went modern and impermanent. A lamp sat on the surface, connected to an outlet in the wall. Beside the lamp, a neat stack of papers, handwritten notes organized into a binder with labeled tabs. And beside the binder, a journal. Thick, leather-bound, the cover worn soft with handling. The spine creased from being opened and closed hundreds of times by the same careful hands. Cora set her phone on the desk with the flashlight pointing up to spread light across the surface. She opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, the kind of handwriting that came from a generation that was taught penmanship like it was a form of character, like how you formed your letters said something true about how you moved through the world. The ink had faded slightly with time but remained fully legible. If you are reading this, you found the basement. I don't know who you are. I don't know how you came to own this place. But if you are reading these words, then you are the person I have been waiting for. My name is Edmund Hale. I built the Briarwood Diner in 1978 after I came back from overseas and needed something to do with my hands and my days. I built this basement in the years that followed, a little at a time, because I was a soldier before I was a restaurateur, and soldiers learn early that the time to prepare is before you need to, not after. Some people thought I was eccentric. Some people said worse things than that. But I saw things during my years of service that most people never see. And those things taught me that the distance between normal and catastrophe is shorter than anyone wants to believe. I decided I would rather be ready for something that never came than unprepared for something that did. I ran this diner for 30 years, then I closed it. I had my reasons. They were complicated, the way reasons always are, when they involve family and time and things that cannot be undone. I am old now, the kind of old where you feel it in the mornings and you start making peace with the afternoons. I don't have family I trust to leave this place to. Not because I don't love them, but because love and trust are not the same thing, and the people I love would not understand what this place is. So I am leaving it to the universe. I am trusting that the right person will find their way here when the time is right. If that person is you, then welcome. Use this place well. Edmund Hale, 2022. Cora sat with the journal open for a moment, the words settling into her, the way words settle when they are addressed to you specifically, even though the person who wrote them didn't know your name. Then she turned the page. More entries, inventory logs, maintenance schedules, instructions for the generator with step-by-step detail, notes on the ventilation system, a hand-drawn map of the property showing the locations of utility shutoffs, and a secondary access point she hadn't found yet. Everything documented with the thoroughness of a man who had spent a lifetime understanding that details were the difference between survival and its absence. She read for a long time. The flashlight held. The room was warm enough, the concrete retaining the day's heat even as the November air above ground grew colder. Nora sat on the bottom step and read the entries Cora had already turned past, both of them moving through the accumulated record of Edmund Hale's 40 years of quiet preparation in companionable silence. The final entry was dated 14 months before the present day. I think this will be my last entry. My heart has been telling me things I don't have the luxury of ignoring anymore. The doctor uses words like management and monitoring, which I have learned are the words doctors use when they mean something else entirely. I have one regret that does not resolve itself on the long walks I take in the evenings when the weather allows. There was a girl who worked here 20 years ago, Savannah. I hired her the day she walked through the door because she had the look of someone who needed to be hired before they were asked any questions that might give them a reason to leave. She was 19 years old and she had nothing. And within a week of being here, she had made the place better in ways I couldn't have anticipated and wouldn't have thought to ask for. She stayed one summer. Then she left the way some people leave, all at once, and without the conversation I would have wanted to have with her. I spent years trying to find her. A private investigator eventually, when the informal methods exhausted themselves. The investigator found her records. She had died some years ago, a car accident. The kind of accident that is nobody's fault and everybody's grief. But she had children, 2 daughters. They went into the foster care system, and the system is not built for people trying to look in from the outside. I have tried. The records are sealed. The pathways are narrow, and I am running out of time to navigate them. So I am doing the only thing left to me. I am leaving this place the only way I know how, with a $5 auction and a faith that somehow, in a way I cannot engineer, the right person will arrive. If you are reading this, whoever you are, know that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. And if by some grace I cannot explain, you happen to be Savannah's girls, then know this: I looked for you. I never stopped looking. Cora stopped reading. She read the last paragraph again, then again. The words were the same each time. They did not change to something more manageable. Savannah, 2 daughters, foster care. She looked up at Nora on the stairs. Nora had been watching her sister's face and had already seen something shift in it, because Nora had always been able to read Cora the way you read a road you have traveled many times, watching for the things that tell you what is coming before it arrives. "What does it say?" Nora asked. Cora's voice, when it came, was not entirely steady. His name was Edmund Hale. He built this place in 1978. He had someone who worked for him years ago. She stopped, looked at the page. A girl named Savannah. The silence in the basement was complete. He said she had 2 daughters, Cora continued. He said they went into foster care. He said he tried to find them. She looked at her sister. He couldn't, so he left the diner in an auction for $5. And he said he hoped that somehow the right person would find it. Nora stood up from the stair. She crossed the basement floor and looked at the journal over Cora's shoulder. She read the final entry herself slowly, the way she read things that mattered, giving each sentence the time it required. Then she looked at Cora. "Our mother's name was Savannah," she said. "I know. Savannah Sinclair. I know. He was looking for us." The words sat in the air between them, too large for the space, too much for the moment, entirely and completely true. Cora had not cried in 11 years. She had not cried when they moved her from the second foster home to the third, when she was 7 and didn't understand why, but understood that crying would not change it. She had not cried when she aged out of the system 3 days ago, and a caseworker shook her hand like she was completing a transaction. She had not cried on the bus, or at the clerk's office, or on the 4-mile walk down a gravel road to a diner nobody wanted. She cried now. Not because she was sad, not in the way that word usually means. She cried because, for 11 years, she and Nora had moved through the world as people who belonged to no one and no place. People without a history that reached forward to claim them. And now, in a concrete basement beneath a diner in a Montana town she had never heard of 6 days ago, a man she had never met had left her proof that someone had been looking. Proof that belonging was not something that had to be earned from scratch. Proof that it had been waiting, patient and certain, for them to find their way to it. Nora put her arms around her sister and held on. They stayed like that for a long time. Long enough for the crying to finish and the quiet to start feeling like something other than emptiness. Long enough for the basement to begin feeling, just slightly, like somewhere they had always been heading without knowing the name of the place. 2 girls in a basement full of provisions laid in by a man who had spent decades preparing for a future he didn't live to see. The generator sat quietly in its corner. The shelves held their careful inventory. The lamp on the desk spread its light across the journal that had waited 14 months for someone to open it. Outside, through 2 layers of concrete and old wood, the November wind moved through the Montana pines. The diner waited above them, patient, intact, preserved against the day it would be needed. They had come 2,000 miles on $5 and a decision that made no sense. They had arrived exactly where someone had been hoping they would. They slept in the basement that first night. Cora found the switch for the overhead lights, fluorescent tubes that hummed to life after a moment of hesitation, filling the room with clean white light that made the whole place look less like a secret and more like what it actually was. A room built by a man who understood that preparation was its own form of love. She found sleeping bags on one of the lower shelves, still sealed in their factory packaging, and she and Nora made a small camp near Edmund's desk, the journal between them like something they had been entrusted with. Nora fell asleep quickly, the way she always did when her body decided it had processed enough for one day. Cora lay awake and listened to her sister breathe and thought about a woman named Savannah Sinclair who had walked through the door of this diner 20 years ago with nothing and been given a chance by a man who didn't have to give it. She thought about what it meant that they were here. She didn't have a word for it yet. She thought she might not for a while, and that was all right. In the morning, the light that came down through the ventilation grates was gray and thin, the particular gray of November in a place that takes winter seriously and expects you to do the same. Cora climbed the stairs, crossed the kitchen, and stood at the front windows of the diner looking out at a parking lot covered in frost so thick it looked like snow. Her breath fogged in the cold air of the dining room. The building had not been heated in 15 years. That was going to have to change. She spent the morning working. She found a broom in the kitchen closet and started with the dining room floor, raising clouds of dust that turned golden in the thin morning light. She wiped down the counter with rags she tore from an old tablecloth she found in a storage cabinet. She cleaned the windows from the inside until the glass was clear enough to let the pale winter sun through properly, and the diner looked less like something abandoned and more like something waiting to be used again. Nora joined her after an hour, still pulling her hair back with a rubber band she'd found somewhere. She didn't ask what the plan was. She started cleaning the other side of the dining room without being asked, moving methodically from booth to booth, with the quiet focus that had always made her seem older than she was, older and more certain. By noon, the dining room looked like somewhere a person might actually want to eat. The kitchen took longer, but the equipment was sound. The pipes ran clear after a few minutes of protesting the interruption of 15 years of stillness. And when Cora finally got the old coffee machine cycling through its startup sequence, the smell that moved through the kitchen and into the dining room beyond was so ordinary and so right that both of them stopped what they were doing and just stood there breathing it in without saying anything. Because some things don't need commentary. It was almost 3 o'clock when the truck came. Cora heard it before she saw it. The crunch of tires on frozen gravel, an engine that had been running a long time and had opinions about it. She stepped out the front door into the cold and watched an old pickup roll to a stop in the center of the parking lot. The truck was the same vintage as the one in the photograph on the wall, though not the same truck. This one had been kept running through decades of hard use and careful attention by someone who understood that things worth keeping require tending. The man who climbed out was tall and thin, moving with the deliberate care of someone who had learned not to rush because rushing cost more than it saved. He was 76 at least, white-haired, wearing denim overalls over a flannel shirt the color of old barnwood. His eyes, when they found Cora's, were the pale blue of winter sky, sharp and measuring and old in the way that shows. He stopped when he saw her face. Not a stop of surprise exactly, more like the stop of a man who has been expecting something for a long time and is not entirely prepared for it to actually arrive, because you can expect something for decades and still not be ready when it does. "Well," he said, after a moment that had weight to it, "I'll be." Cora waited. He crossed the parking lot slowly, not taking his eyes off her. "You're the one who bought the place." "Yes, sir." He stopped a few feet away and looked at her the way people look at things they are trying to reconcile with something they already carry inside them. "What's your name, girl?" "Cora Sinclair." The name landed on him visibly. His jaw tightened. Something moved through his eyes that was old and complicated, and not entirely sad, and not entirely anything simple. "Sinclair," he said. "Yes, sir." He reached into the chest pocket of his overalls and produced a wallet so worn it had softened to the texture of old cloth. From inside it, he extracted a photograph, small, faded at the edges, handled so many times the surface had gone smooth. He held it out to her without speaking. The woman in the photograph was standing behind the counter of this diner, the same counter Cora had spent the morning cleaning. She was young, maybe 20, wearing an apron, her hair pulled back. She was caught mid-laugh at something off camera, her whole face open with it, the kind of laugh that made you want to know what caused it. Cora knew that face. She had one photograph of her mother. Just one, carried in a Ziploc bag inside her garbage bag for 11 years, protected the way you protect the things you cannot replace. The face in it was the same face. "Edmund took that picture the day he hired her," the old man said. "Kept it in his wallet every day after she left. 20 years he carried that photograph." He looked at Cora. "My name is Garrett Moss. I run the general store in town. I was Edmund Hale's closest friend for going on 40 years. A pause that had grief in it. "I was there the day he closed this place." Cora didn't trust her voice yet. She nodded. "Your mother worked here the summer of 2003, Garrett said. She was 19 years old and she had nothing. And Edmund hired her before she finished her first sentence because he said he could tell the kind of person she was by the way she walked through the door." He looked at the diner behind Cora. "She made this place better. Made everyone in it better. Then one morning she was gone." "She died," Cora said. "Car accident. I was 6. Garrett closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they were bright. "I know. Edmund found out years later. Nearly undid him." He paused. "But then he found out she'd had children. 2 girls. He tried everything he could think of to locate you. The system wouldn't open up for him. Records sealed, courts unmoved. He put the photograph back in his wallet with the care of someone returning something irreplaceable to its proper place. So he did what he could with what he had. $5, Cora said. $5 in faith. Garrett looked at her steadily. He believed you'd come. Right up until the end, he believed it. A pause, rougher than the others. He just didn't live long enough to see it. They stood in the cold parking lot and Cora felt the wind come through from the north and thought about a man she had never met who had spent 20 years looking for her and left her everything he had when the looking ran out. Nora appeared in the doorway of the diner behind her. Garrett looked at her and his expression shifted, softer now. Something that might have been grief processed over a long time into something that could be used. That's the younger one, he said. Not a question. Nora, Cora said. She's 14. Garrett Moss nodded slowly. Come inside, he said. Both of you. I've got things to tell you, and I'd rather tell them somewhere warm. Clara Vane arrived the next morning driving a sedan that had seen 3 Montana winters too many and was philosophical about it. She was 71, small and wiry, with silver hair and a tight braid down her back, and hands that had spent 5 decades doing things that mattered and showed every one of those years in the best possible way. She had been a waitress at the Briarwood Diner for 15 years before Edmund closed it, and according to Garrett, she had cried the day the doors locked for the last time and had never entirely made her peace with it. She walked through the dining room slowly, touching things. The counter edge, the back of a stool, the chrome napkin holder on the nearest table. Her hands moved over these surfaces the way hands move over things they remember. Then she turned to Cora with an expression that was full of things that had been waiting a long time to be said to the right person. I was here the day your mother walked through that door, Clara said. She looked exactly the way you look right now. Tired clear through, but holding herself up because there was someone watching and she wasn't going to let them see it. She paused. Edmund looked at her for about 30 seconds and said, You're hired. Just like that. No application, no questions. He had good instincts about people. It was one of his best qualities. What was she like? Nora asked. Clara thought about this the way people think about things they want to get exactly right, giving the question the respect it deserved. She made people feel like they were worth something, she said finally. Didn't matter who came through that door, truck driver, traveling salesman, some family 3 hours from where they were going, road-weary and irritable. She had a way of making whoever was in front of her feel like they were exactly the right person to be there at exactly the right time. A pause. People drove out of their way to eat here that summer, more than usual. I don't think they always knew why. She looked at Cora steadily. I see her in you, the same way of standing, the same look in your eye when you're deciding something. That afternoon, Clara taught them how to use the commercial coffee machine, walking them through each step with patient precision. The following morning, she brought a bag of supplies from her own kitchen and showed them how the griddle worked, how to read its temperature by the way water moved on its surface, how to tell when it was ready without a thermometer. Her hands moved through these motions with the fluency of 10,000 repetitions, and she talked while she worked, about the diner and the town and the people who used to come through, building a picture of a place and a time that Cora and Nora had missed by 20 years, but that felt somehow like something they were inheriting rather than something they had lost. It was Clara who noticed Nora's breathing. She said nothing about it directly. She simply appeared one afternoon with a small envelope and pressed it into Cora's hand when Nora was occupied in the other room. And when Cora opened it, she found cash, enough for 3 months of medication, held together with a paperclip and no ceremony. My late husband had bad lungs, Clara said before Cora could speak. I know what that sound means, and I know what those inhalers cost. She met Cora's eyes with a steadiness that did not invite argument or gratitude or anything that would slow things down. Edmund would have done the same thing. Now go get that girl her medicine. 4 days after they arrived, the black SUV came. Cora heard it from inside the kitchen, the sound of a vehicle that had been built to announce itself and knew it. She stepped out through the dining room and through the front door and saw it parked in the center of the lot. So clean and dark, it looked like it had been placed there by someone making a point about what power looked like. Behind it, a county sheriff's cruiser sat with its engine running. The woman who stepped out of the SUV was 56, with blonde hair cut sharp at the jaw and the posture of someone accustomed to rooms arranging themselves around her arrival. Her suit was charcoal gray, her shoes were entirely wrong for a gravel parking lot in November, and she walked across it as though it were the kind of floor she was used to. Behind her, a young man climbed out of the passenger side, mid-20s, dark-haired, with the expression of someone who had raised an objection earlier in the drive and not been heard. Sheriff Beckett Lowe came from the cruiser, a broad-shouldered man of 50 with a weathered face and careful eyes, moving with the particular deliberate slowness of someone who has learned over many years that arriving at situations carefully is generally better than arriving fast. The woman stopped in front of Cora. "Are you the individual who purchased this property through the county auction?" "I am. My name is Sylvia Hale Merritt. Edmund Hale was my grandfather." She let that sit for exactly 1 second, measuring the effect. "This property belongs to my family. The auction was conducted without proper notification to the legal heirs of the estate, which makes the sale procedurally invalid. I've already been in contact with a real estate attorney. You have 30 days to vacate." The young man behind her, Owen, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes met Cora's briefly and then moved away, carrying something in them that wasn't agreement with what his mother was saying. Cora kept her voice level. "The auction was conducted by the county clerk's office. The sale is documented. I have the deed. A $5 transaction executed while the legitimate heirs were managing an estate." Sylvia's tone was the tone of someone who has delivered this kind of information many times and found it straightforward each time. No court in this state will uphold it. Sheriff Lowe cleared his throat with the practiced timing of a man who has inserted himself into many conversations at the exact right moment. "Mrs. Merritt, the legal process is what it is. This isn't the venue to resolve the question." Sylvia didn't look at him. 30 days, she said to Cora. "I'd suggest using them wisely." She turned and walked back to the SUV. Owen lingered for a moment, long enough for something to move across his face that looked like an apology that hadn't found its words yet, and then he followed. Sheriff Lowe watched them go. Then he looked at Cora with an expression that was not without sympathy. "You should find yourself a lawyer," he said, "for what it's worth." He drove away. Cora stood in the parking lot until both vehicles were out of sight. Then she went back inside, sat down at the counter, and looked at the dining room she and Nora had spent 3 days cleaning into something that looked like a future. 30 days. She thought about giving up. She looked at the thought directly and honestly, the way you look at practical options when you are a practical person. Then she set it aside, because giving up meant going back to the bus terminal and the shelter with no beds and Nora's breathing getting worse in the cold, and that was not a direction she was willing to move in. What she needed was information. Information was something she could get for herself. The next morning, she walked into town and found the county library, which was small and under-resourced, and staffed by a woman named Greta, who had worked there for 31 years and knew how to find things with the particular expertise of someone who has spent decades making inadequate resources do more than they should be able to do. Cora asked about property records, land transactions, anything relating to the parcels along the old highway east of town. Greta showed her how to access the county assessor's database. Cora sat at a terminal for 3 hours. What she found was a pattern. Beginning in 2019, a company called ClearPath Energy Solutions had been acquiring land parcels along the old highway corridor east of Briarwood. Small purchases at first, individual lots from landowners who were ready to sell and not asking too many questions about why a company wanted them. Then larger acquisitions. The purchases moved methodically eastward, parcel by parcel, the way a hand moves across a map when someone knows exactly where they are going and is simply executing a plan that has already been fully formed. The diner property sat at the end of the corridor, the last piece, the only gap. Cora searched ClearPath Energy Solutions and found press releases about utility-scale solar installations and electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the rural West. She found a county planning commission document from 8 months ago, a preliminary inquiry about a proposed development along the old highway. The name of the project redacted, but the acreage required described in careful detail. The acreage matched the accumulated parcels exactly, with one gap remaining. A rectangular gap the precise size of a diner lot in its parking area. She found a land valuation estimate filed with the Planning Commission. The parcel, as part of the completed corridor, was assessed at $480,000. She sat with that number for a while. She thought about what a person would do for $480,000. She thought about what that number would make some people willing to do to a 17-year-old girl with no family and no lawyer and no resources except a dead man's journal and $5 that were already spent. Then she walked back to the diner and didn't say anything to Nora about it, because Nora was 14 and had enough to carry without adding this. Owen Merritt came on the 12th day. He came alone, in a different vehicle than the one he'd arrived in with his mother, an older sedan that he parked at the edge of the lot with the diffidence of someone who was not certain of his welcome and was not going to presume it. He knocked on the door even though it was standing open. Cora noted that. People who knock on open doors have usually thought carefully about why they are there and what they hope to find when they cross the threshold. He was 26, with his mother's sharp features softened by something she didn't seem to have, something that might have been doubt that had been working on his face long enough to leave a permanent mark. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I just need you to have some information that I think you should have." He reached into his jacket and produced a folder, and inside it was a copy of a legal document. Cora recognized the format from the county clerk's database, but the content was different from anything she had found there. This was Edmund Hale's will, the actual document, not a summary or a reference, not a court filing. The full text, witnessed and notarized, dated March of 2022, 8 months before Edmund died. She read Article 5. Edmund's language was plain and deliberate, the same quality she had come to recognize from the journal, the same man, the same precision, the same refusal to dress a thing up when saying it plainly would do better. He wrote that he was leaving the diner property through public auction because he believed that homes should go to those who needed them, not those who stood to profit from them. He wrote that his family had never understood what the diner represented. He wrote that he anticipated they might contest the arrangement, and he asked any court reviewing the matter to weigh his clearly stated intent alongside any procedural objection raised against it. He wrote that there was someone he had been trying to find for 20 years, and that he hoped the manner of the sale might serve as a means of finding her. Cora set the document on the counter. "My mother knows about this," Owen said. "She's seen it. Her lawyers are arguing that the manner of the auction, no direct notification to heirs, constitutes procedural impropriety sufficient to overturn the sale regardless of the testator's intent." He paused. "They might be right technically. Small county courts can be sympathetic to local families with deep roots." "Your mother grew up here," Cora said. "Her mother did. My mother grew up in Denver." He looked out the window at the parking lot. "She hasn't been back here in 15 years, not until my great-grandfather died. She didn't come to the funeral." Another pause. "She knew about Clear Path Energy before she knew about you. The offer came in 3 months ago. She stood to make nearly $500,000 if she controlled this property." Cora nodded. She had known, but it was different to hear it said plainly by someone who was choosing to say it. "I want you to keep the property," Owen said. "I want you to know that not everyone on the Merritt side of this is on her side of this." He picked up his keys from the counter where he'd set them. "My great-grandfather spent 40 years building something worth keeping. I'd like it to still be here." After he left, Cora sat at the counter and read Article 5 3 more times, until the language was entirely familiar, until she knew exactly what Edmund had said and why it mattered, and what it would mean in a courtroom if it came to that. On the 20th day, a letter arrived from the Custer County District Court. It was addressed to her properly, her full name, the diner's address, written in the formal font of official correspondence. Inside was a single page on court letterhead. Pursuant to a motion filed by Sylvia Hale Merritt, the court was imposing a temporary stay on the transferred title, pending a formal hearing to review the procedural validity of the auction and sale. The stay took effect immediately. The hearing was scheduled for 38 days out. For the duration of the stay, the property was under contested ownership. The legal status of Cora Sinclair's claim was suspended pending resolution. Cora read the letter standing at the counter in the afternoon light. She set it down. She picked it up and read it again. She set it down a second time and looked at the dining room she and Nora had cleaned, and the windows they had made clear, and the counter they had polished back to something like its original intention. That same afternoon, Garrett came to her and told her quietly that 2 members of the town council had been approached by a representative of Sylvia Hale Merritt's attorneys, suggesting that the county clerk's office might face administrative scrutiny if they were seen to be supporting Cora's position in the dispute. Winifred Yates had not been moved by this, Garrett said. But others in the county building had grown cautious and careful in the way people grow cautious when someone with resources and legal representation makes their displeasure known. That evening, Garrett came back with his hat in his hands, which she had never seen him do, and told her he had received a call from the distributor in Billings who supplied his general store. Someone had been in contact with them. The implication had been made clearly enough without being stated directly. Maintaining business relationships with people connected to an ongoing legal dispute carried its own complications. He was there anyway. He had come back anyway. That told her what she needed to know about Garrett Moss. Clara came the following morning, and Cora could see from the set of her shoulders that something similar had reached her through whatever channel it had found, and Clara had driven out to the diner regardless, and had started making coffee before she'd taken her coat off, which told Cora everything about Clara Vane's response to being pressured by people with more money than she had. But the money was nearly gone. The supplies in the basement covered their food, but Nora's medication cost what it cost. And there were other things, small and practical, that added up in the way small practical things do. The court hearing was 38 days away. Sylvia Hale Merritt had attorneys who did this for a living. Cora had Article 5 in a journal and 2 people who kept showing up despite the cost of doing so. On the 22nd night, she sat on the floor of the dining room after Nora was asleep and looked at the space around her, the clean booths, the polished counter, the windows that let in the moonlight now that they were clear. She thought about $5 and 2,000 miles, and a basement full of supplies, and a man named Edmund Hale, who had believed hard enough in something that he had spent 40 years getting ready for it without knowing exactly what it was. She thought about the letter from the court. She thought about what it meant to fight someone with more money and more lawyers and more connections than you had when you were 17 years old and the only thing you owned was a contested deed to a building nobody had wanted until somebody wanted to sell it. She sat with the idea of giving up and looked at it honestly, the way she looked at every practical option, and then she set it down again. It was a practical thought. It was just the wrong one. What she didn't know, sitting on that floor in the moonlight, was that in 72 hours, the question of who legally owned this building was going to stop mattering in the way that legal documents make things matter, and start mattering in a different way entirely, a way that no court document could settle or unsettle. The storm came on the 23rd night. It began as freezing rain in the afternoon, the kind that coats everything in a skin of ice so thin you don't see it until you're already down. By dark, the rain had turned to snow, fine and dry and moving sideways in a wind that had decided on a direction and was committed to it with the single-mindedness of something that doesn't negotiate. By 9 o'clock, the snow was falling so thickly that the tree line at the edge of the property had disappeared entirely, and the old highway beyond the parking lot was something you had to take on faith rather than sight. The power went at 7:42. Cora heard the transformer blow somewhere down the line, a sound like a rifle shot in the cold air. And then everything electrical in the diner went quiet and dark at the same moment. The refrigerators and the lights and the hum of the heating unit all stopping together in a silence that was its own kind of loud. She and Nora stood in the kitchen in the sudden dark. "The basement," Nora said. They went down. The generator came to life on the third pull of the starter cord, exactly as Edmund's maintenance notes had said it would if the fuel was kept fresh and the connections were cleaned on schedule, which they had been. The fluorescent lights in the basement steadied and held. The ventilation system began its low hum. The temperature in the underground room was already warmer than the kitchen above had been in days, the concrete holding what heat it had stored against exactly this kind of need. Nora looked around the basement with an expression that was several things at once: gratitude and wonder, and something that was closer to grief than either of those. Because understanding what someone built for you and why they built it is its own particular kind of loss. "He really thought of everything," she said. "He did. I keep thinking about that." Nora settled onto the cot they'd set up near the desk. He spent all those years getting ready for something he couldn't name. He didn't know what it would be. He didn't know who would need it. He just kept preparing anyway. Cora didn't answer, but she held the thought and turned it over the way you turn over something that has more to it than its surface shows. The knock came at 9:15. She heard it through the ceiling, faint through 2 layers of floor and the steady sound of the generator, but distinct enough that she knew what it was. She climbed the stairs, crossed the dark kitchen with a flashlight in hand, and opened the front door of the diner. Sheriff Beckett Lowe stood on the step, snow covering his shoulders and his hat brim, Ice gathered in his eyebrows and along his jaw, the cruiser behind him barely visible through the white. He was a large man, and the cold had made him look larger, the way cold contracts things into their essential density. "Power is out across the whole county," he said without preamble. "Temperature is dropping fast. We've got 22 below forecast by morning and the wind isn't stopping." He looked at her steadily and directly. "I've got families in this township without heat, elderly residents on their own, children. The motel on the highway is full and cold anyway. The community center lost its roof in a storm 2 winters ago and never got the budget to fix it." Another pause, deliberate. "I heard about the basement." Cora looked past him at the snow moving in solid sheets across the parking lot. She thought about the court letter on the counter behind her, the temporary stay, the contested ownership. She thought about what it might mean legally to open a building she did not currently, on paper, have clear title to. She thought about what exposure she might be creating for herself. Then she thought about Edmund Hale sitting at a desk in this basement, writing about the moment that would come, writing about what this place was for. "Nora," she called down the stairs. Nora appeared at the bottom of the staircase, looking up. "Edmund didn't build this to keep the door locked," Cora said. Nora looked at her sister with the expression of someone who had already known what the answer would be, and had simply been waiting for the question to be asked. "No," she said quietly. "He didn't." Cora turned back to the sheriff. "Bring everyone who needs shelter," she said. "We have room." They came in through the snow like figures emerging from something erased, one at a time and then in small groups, stamping their boots at the threshold and blinking in the light of the battery lanterns Cora had set up along the counter in the diner's front room. Sheriff Lowe brought the first group himself, the Hartwell family from the farm 2 miles east, Denton and Marge Hartwell and their daughter-in-law Patrice, and 3 children ranging from 4 to 9, all of them carrying the particular bewilderment of people who left a warm house not long ago and have not yet fully processed that it is no longer available to them. After the Hartwells came the Osgoods, 4 of them, 2 generations, and after the Osgoods came a retired schoolteacher named Vivian Marsh, who was 81 years old and had made the walk from her house a 1/4 mile down the road on foot because her phone had died before she could call anyone. She arrived with ice in her hair and a casserole dish she had carried the entire distance wrapped in a dish towel because she had not known what else to bring, and the casserole was what she had made that morning, and it seemed wrong to leave it. They kept coming. By midnight, 38 people were in the basement of the Briarwood Diner. Cora had opened every sleeping bag on the shelves and laid them out along the walls in the systematic way Edmund's notes suggested for maximum capacity. She had unboxed the portable stoves and set up 3 of them on the workbench along the far wall, heating water in the largest pots from the supply shelves. She had found 6 cases of canned soup in the organized rows and opened them methodically, one after another, and the smell of chicken broth warming in a cold room full of cold people did something immediate and visible to the faces around her, something that went straight past the physical to whatever is underneath the physical. Nora worked beside her without being asked, doing the things that needed doing in the order they needed doing, carrying boxes from the shelves and distributing blankets to the families with children first, sitting down with the youngest Hartwell girl when she started crying from cold and exhaustion, and reading to her from an old novel she had found on the shelf near Edmund's desk until the crying stopped and the girl's eyes went soft with sleep. Cora watched her sister move through the room and thought about what Edmund had written in the journal about Savannah, how she made people feel like they were worth something, how she made the room better by being in it. She looked at Nora and thought, there it is. There is the thing that passes from one generation to the next without being taught. Garrett Moss arrived at 11, having walked 2 miles through the storm from his house at the edge of town, because it had not occurred to him to do anything else. He came down the basement stairs with ice crusted thick on his coat and his breath coming in visible clouds, and he stopped at the bottom and looked at the room full of people, the light and the warmth and the soup on the stoves, the children asleep and the adults talking low. And something moved through his face that went through several things before settling into something that was not quite any single emotion, but contained all of them in the same space. He found Cora near the supply shelves. "Edmund spent 30 years getting this place ready," he said quietly, his voice rough from the cold and from something else. "He told me once he didn't know what he was preparing for exactly, just that there would be a moment, and that the moment would require someone who understood what doors are actually for." He looked at her steadily. "He was right about you. He didn't know your name, didn't know your face, but he was right. Clara Vane appeared an hour later, having gotten a ride with a neighbor whose truck sat high enough to navigate the drifts. She walked straight to the stoves, assessed what was happening with the quick eye of someone who had fed people under pressure for 15 years, and took over the food operation without announcing that she was doing so. She redistributed the heat sources for better efficiency, found the largest pots in Edmund's equipment inventory, and began producing soup in quantities that actually matched the number of people who needed it, which was something Cora had been working toward without quite arriving. Vivian Marsh found Cora near midnight, when the soup had gone around twice, and the children were asleep, and the adults had settled into the quiet of people who are warm and safe, and are allowing that fact to be sufficient for the moment. I taught school in this county for 41 years, Vivian said, her hands wrapped around a cup, her voice soft. I knew Edmund Hale, not deeply, the way you know people in a small place, across a counter and at the occasional community meeting. But I knew who he was. She looked around the room with its sleeping families and its makeshift warmth. He used to say that the only preparation worth making was the kind that helped other people. That you could spend a lifetime getting ready for a disaster that never came, and if you'd built something in the meantime that helped your neighbors, you hadn't wasted a single day of it. A pause. I didn't understand what he meant for a long time. I think I understand it now. Cora was checking on the Hartwell children, who had made a nest of sleeping bags in the corner nearest the generator and were deeply asleep in the tangled way children sleep when they have finally surrendered to exhaustion, when Sheriff Lowe touched her arm and nodded toward the stairs. She followed him up to the dark kitchen, where he had his radio out, and his expression was the expression of a man who was holding information he would rather not have. I've got a situation, he said. A radio call had come in 20 minutes earlier, relayed through the one tower on the ridge east of town that was still partially functional. A vehicle had gone off the old highway 3 miles out, into the drainage ditch along the south shoulder. The driver had attempted to reach emergency services, but the call had dropped in under a minute. The last GPS location from the phone, before it went dark, placed the vehicle at a coordinate he had already identified. He showed Cora the location on his map, 3 miles east on the old highway, the direction you would be coming from if you were driving in from the interstate, from Denver, from a city where the storm had not yet fully developed when you made the decision to get in a car and drive. Who is it? Cora said. It came out flat, not quite a question because she already knew the shape of the answer. Lowe looked at her. Vehicle is registered to a rental company. The renter's name is Sylvia Hale Merritt. The basement below them held its quiet of sleeping people. The storm pressed against the walls with a patience that had no interest in any human situation. Cora stood in the dark kitchen and thought about Sylvia Hale Merritt, who had stood in this parking lot 3 weeks ago and told her she had 30 days before she would be removed, who had filed a motion with a court and pressured suppliers and worked every available lever to take this place away from 2 girls who had nothing else, who was lying in a ditch 3 miles from here in temperatures that were, according to the last reading Lowe had, 24 below zero and still dropping. She thought about Edmund's journal, the 40 years of preparation, the faith that the right person would understand what the door was for. She thought about her mother walking into this diner with nothing and being given a chance by a man who had every practical reason not to bother. I need a rope, Cora said. Lowe looked at her for a long moment, reading her face with the careful attention of someone making an assessment that matters. It's a 3-mile walk in a complete whiteout. Wind chill is approaching -40. I won't tell you it's safe because it isn't, and I won't pretend otherwise. I know. She is the person trying to take this property from you. I know that too. He studied her for another moment. Whatever he found there settled something in him, because he nodded, the nod of a man who has stopped arguing and started planning. I've got rope in the cruiser and 2 emergency kits. I need 2 more people who know how to move in this kind of weather and won't panic in a whiteout. She went to the top of the basement stairs. Owen, she called down. He was there in under a minute. When she told him, something moved through his face rapidly. Several things at once. And what settled was a kind of grim resolve that had relief in it, as though he had been waiting for something he could actually do. Denton Hartwell came without being asked, because he had heard and because he was the kind of man who responds to that kind of information with his boots already on before anyone has finished explaining. A man named Pruitt, who worked for the county road department and had arrived with the second group of shelter seekers, made 5. He apparently knew this stretch of highway as well as anyone living, which was what they needed. They tied into the rope in the parking lot, 5 of them, Cora and Owen and Lowe and Hartwell and Pruitt, connected at intervals of 6 feet, enough distance to move independently, but not enough to lose each other in zero visibility. Then they walked into the white. The cold in the open was a different order of thing from the cold held at bay in the diner or the warmth of the basement. Out here it was the entire world. It came through Cora's coat and her sweater and the layers beneath and went directly to bone with a directness that felt considered, like something that had made a decision about her and was executing it. The wind came in gusts that hit sideways and tried to reorient you, to turn you away from where you were going and toward the easier direction, which was back. Cora kept her head down and her eyes on the ground immediately in front of her feet and put one foot in front of the other with the specific focus of someone who has decided that stopping is not an available option and does not revisit that decision. She thought about Nora asleep in the basement. She thought about the Hartwell children in their sleeping bag nest. She thought about Edmund at his desk, writing about the moment that would require someone who understood what doors are for. She did not think about the cold. She was aware of it in the way you are aware of something that has committed to being part of your experience, regardless of your preferences, and she let it be there and kept moving through it. Pruitt navigated from memory and from the feel of the road surface under his boots, making small adjustments to their direction, calling out corrections to the group in a voice that cut through the wind just barely. They found the car first. It had gone through the guardrail at the outside of a long curve, the metal bent in a V shape, and the car itself was half buried in the drift that had formed in the ditch, visible only because the wind had not yet finished its work, and the corner of the roof caught Lowe's flashlight at an angle that gave it away. Empty. Owen checked the interior while Lowe and Cora swept their lights across the surrounding snow in widening arcs. The car had been running for some time before it stopped, long enough to clear frost from inside the glass. The driver's door was not fully latched, pulled by gravity and wind, but not closed. "She got out," Owen said. His voice was controlled in the way voices get when the person using them is applying deliberate effort to keeping them that way. They spread out along the rope to its full extent and moved along the ditch. Lowe swept his light systematically. Hartwell moved to the far side of the road where a second drainage channel ran along a fence line. Pruitt moved upwind on the reasoning that a person confused and cold would tend to drift that direction without knowing it. Cora moved downwind on the opposite reasoning. If you were confused and cold and the wind was at your back, you would keep going until you couldn't anymore. She found her 40 yards from the car. Sylvia Hale Merritt was in the south ditch, curled on her side with her coat pulled tight around her and her knees drawn up, the posture of a body that has stopped trying to move and has started trying instead to be as small as possible and retain what little warmth it has left. Snow had drifted over her legs and her lower back. Her hair, which had been precise and controlled in the parking lot 3 weeks ago, was loose and ice-crusted. Her face was turned away from the wind. Her lips, when Cora turned her gently, were a shade of blue that had nothing to do with cold air and everything to do with how long she had been in it. She was breathing. Cora called out. Her voice was taken by the wind immediately, but the rope had gone taut the moment she stopped moving, and the others were already pulling toward her. She got her coat off in the time it took them to reach her, the cold hitting her without it like something solid, and she wrapped it around Sylvia's upper body and held it there. Lowe got the emergency blanket out of the kit, and Owen removed his own coat without being asked and without comment. They didn't try to revive her there. Lowe made that call immediately and clearly. Moving was what mattered. They carried her between them on the return, Owen and Hartwell bearing most of the weight, Cora and Lowe maintaining the rope line and navigating, Pruitt breaking the wind ahead of the group with his body in the way that strong people do when they have decided this is the most useful thing they can contribute. The 3 miles back took longer than the 3 miles out had, because they were slower with the weight and because the storm had used their absence to intensify. The visibility down further and the wind up. Cora was not wearing a coat. She was aware of this as a fact, the way she was aware of the cold itself. as something present and continuing and not subject to her preferences about it. Her finger stopped hurting somewhere around the halfway point. She recognized what that meant from Edmund's cold weather notes and kept her hands moving, flexing them on the rope, because she understood the information her body was giving her and intended to act on it rather than be fooled by it. The glow of the diner appeared in the white ahead of them first, diffuse and warm, and then the shape of the building, and then the parking lot, and then the door. People had seen them coming. The basement stairs were full of hands reaching up to help, and Sylvia was passed from the search party to the people inside with a care and efficiency that Cora noticed even through the fog of her own state. Clara was already directing, calling for the warmest blankets, clearing space near the largest heat source, her voice steady and sure. Lo was talking in the low, practical tone of someone who knows exactly what needs to happen next and is making sure it happens. Cora reached the bottom of the stairs, and her legs made a decision without consulting her, and she sat down on the lowest step. Nora was there in seconds, both arms around her, pulling her close and holding on with the grip of someone who has been frightened and is now expressing that fear as contact. "You're frozen," Nora said. "I'm okay. You went out without your coat." "I know." "Cora." "I'm okay, Nora." Her sister held on tighter and Cora let her, because some things deserve to be held. Across the room, in the corner nearest the largest portable stove, Clara and two others were working on Sylvia Hale Merritt with the systematic knowledge of people who know what the body needs when it has been pushed this far and are providing it in the right order. Owen crouched nearby, watching his mother's face with an expression that had set aside everything else and was doing only one thing. The color came back the way it always comes back, slowly, the body making its calculations and returning to its processes in the sequence it has determined they matter: core before extremities, survival before comfort. An hour passed and then another. The storm pressed on. The generator held. The lights held. The soup went around again. The children slept and the adults spoke quietly about the small, ordinary things that people talk about when they have been reminded that ordinary things are not guaranteed and are choosing to be grateful for them rather than take them as given. Cora slept without deciding to, becoming aware that she had been asleep somewhere near 3 in the morning. She was on a cot near the desk with 2 sleeping bags over her and Nora asleep on the adjacent cot. The basement had gone to the quieter rhythm of a room full of sleeping people, the stove still burning, the generator steady as a pulse. Sylvia Hale Merritt was awake. She was sitting up on the cot where she had been placed, a sleeping bag around her shoulders, a cup of something warm held between both hands. Her color was still uneven, the recovery showing in the blotchy way recovery from cold always shows, but her eyes were clear and tracking and present. Owen sat in a folding chair beside her, and they were talking in voices too low to carry. Cora sat up. The movement made Sylvia turn to look at her, and their eyes met across the room, across the sleeping forms of 36 people who had come in from the cold, across a distance that was and wasn't about physical space. Cora got up and walked across the room. She pulled a folding chair from against the wall and sat down. "You saved my life," Sylvia said. Her voice was still rough, scraped. "Yes." A pause. "Why?" Cora thought about how to answer this honestly and settled on the simplest version because simple and honest were the same thing here. "Because this is what this place is for," she said. "Your grandfather built it to save lives. All of them. Not just the ones that make it easy." Sylvia looked down at the cup in her hands. Something in her face was working, rearranging itself around information it was only now processing. "Owen told me you found the journal. The first night. He told me what Edmund wrote about Savannah." She looked up. "About her daughters." A pause with real weight to it. "You're one of them." "Both of us," Cora said. "Nora, too." Sylvia closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had changed in them, something that had perhaps been there for a long time, under a surface that had been too rigid to let it show. "I didn't know about her," she said. "About Savannah. I didn't know he had been looking for anyone. My grandfather and I were not close." She paused. "My mother was not close to him. The diner was the reason she gave. She felt it came first before everything. Before her." Another pause. She was not entirely wrong about that. "He knew that," Cora said. "He wrote about it." Owen reached into his jacket and removed a folded envelope. He held it for a moment, looking at it, and then he held it out to his mother. "He left this for you with his attorney," he said. "I've been carrying it for 2 weeks trying to find the right moment." Sylvia took the envelope with both hands. She opened it with the care of someone who understands that some letters, once read, cannot be unread, and that this is the right thing about them. She read it in the quiet of the basement while 36 people slept, and the storm made its case against the walls above. Cora did not read over her shoulder. She waited. When Sylvia finished, she held the letter in her lap and sat very still. The tears that came were not the produced kind, not the kind that serves a social function. They were the other kind, the private kind, the kind that arrive when something you have carried for a very long time finally, after years of effort, puts itself down. "He said he was sorry," Sylvia said finally, her voice barely carrying across the small distance between them. "He said he knew the diner had cost his family more than it was worth, in the ways that actually matter. He said he couldn't undo what had been lost." A pause. "He said he loved her, my mother, that he had always loved her and had been very bad at showing it." Cora said nothing. Some things need the space that a response would fill. "He also said," Sylvia continued, her voice steadying slightly on the words as though she was finding firmer ground, "that he had spent 20 years trying to find two girls who deserved to know that someone had loved their mother, that he was sorry he hadn't found them in time to tell them himself." She looked at Cora. "He said if I ever found them, he hoped I would tell them." The basement was very quiet. "I'm telling you," Sylvia said. In the morning, the storm began to give up. The wind came down first, losing its insistence by degrees, and then the snow thinned from a wall to a curtain to a veil, and finally to individual flakes falling straight in air that had gone still, the way snow falls when it has stopped being a weapon and remembered that it is also beautiful. By mid-morning, the clouds broke in the west and thin winter sunlight came through, striking the snow with the particular clarity that follows a serious storm. The world washed clean and very still and startlingly present. One by one, the people who had sheltered in the basement went home. They left in the order their situations allowed, those with trucks that could manage the drifts first, then those who could walk to neighbors who had trucks. Every departure was marked by something. A handshake held a moment longer than necessary, an embrace, a moment of eye contact that said more than the gesture itself was able to contain. Vivian Marsh, the last of the adults to leave, took Cora's hands in both of hers and held them. "He would have been proud of you," she said. "Edmund. He would have been so proud." The Hartwell children presented Nora with a drawing they had made during the long hours of the second night, executed in crayon on the back of an emergency blanket wrapper. It showed the diner with people going into it and a large yellow sun above. Nora folded it with the careful attention she gave to things she intended to keep. When everyone had gone, the basement held only Cora and Nora and Garrett and Clara and Sylvia and Owen, and the accumulated evidence of what 3 days in this room had been. Empty soup cans and folded sleeping bags, and a battery lantern someone had left behind, and the smell of people and warmth in a room that had been built to hold exactly that. Sylvia stood in the center of the room looking at Edmund's shelves, the 40 years of careful accumulation. "He really thought of everything," she said. "He really did," Garrett said quietly. She turned and looked at the desk, the lamp, the binder, the journal. Then she looked at Cora. "I'm withdrawing the lawsuit," she said. "I'll call the attorneys this morning. The motion will be dismissed before the week is out." Cora had prepared herself for this moment to feel like simple relief, and it did contain relief, but it contained other things too that she hadn't expected. A sadness for all the days of uncertainty, a gratitude that reached further than the specific outcome, and something that felt like the sensation of a door opening that you had begun to believe might not. "Thank you," she said. "Don't," Sylvia said, not unkindly, with something in her voice that was new. "I'm not doing you a favor. I'm correcting a mistake I made because I was looking at the wrong thing." She paused. "There's a difference." 3 days later, Sheriff Beckett Lowe filed his report with the Custer County District Court. It was a factual document in the way official reports are required to be factual. But the facts themselves told a story that was not neutral, and the judge who reviewed it was not a person who missed what facts were saying when they were saying something important. The report documented the conditions of the storm, the number of county residents sheltered in the basement of property parcel 7742, the organized nature of the emergency response conducted by the current occupant of that property. The life recovered when said occupant led a search party into whiteout conditions to bring back a person who would not have survived the night. The report noted specifically that all of this had occurred during a court-ordered temporary stay on the property's title, and that the occupant had proceeded regardless of her own legal exposure, without conditions and without hesitation. Owen Merritt filed a supplemental account of the events from his own perspective, detailed and specific, witnessed and notarized. The district court judge issued her ruling in writing. She wrote that the temporary stay was lifted by the voluntary withdrawal of the contesting motion and that the title transfer was therefore restored. She wrote that she was additionally entering a formal finding on the question of testamentary intent, not required by the withdrawal, but warranted in her view by the full record before her. She wrote that the documented conduct of the current occupant during the period of the stay, specifically the decision to open the property for emergency public shelter at personal legal and physical risk, without conditions and without regard for her own precarious legal position, constituted the most direct possible demonstration of the intent expressed in Article 5 of Edmund Hale's will. She wrote that some things prove themselves. Garrett brought the box on a Thursday. He had been holding it since Edmund's death, 14 months, waiting for the moment Edmund had told him he would recognize when it came. He said he was certain now. He set the box on the counter in front of Cora with the deliberate care of someone completing something that was entrusted to them a long time ago. The box was wooden, simple, and well-made, with a brass latch tarnished to a warm brown. Cora opened it at the counter with Nora beside her and Garrett and Clara standing nearby, the way witnesses stand, present and quiet, understanding that this moment belongs to someone else. Inside the box were photographs. The first one she recognized from Garrett's wallet, the image that had been in Edmund's wallet for 20 years. Savannah Sinclair behind the counter with a coffee pot and a laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the moment that caused it. But this print was larger and clearer, and Cora could see things in it she hadn't been able to see in the smaller worn copy. The way her mother held the coffee pot, the angle of her wrist, the specific quality of a joy that was entirely her own. There were others. Savannah refilling sugar dispensers, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Savannah and Clara in the kitchen doorway, both of them squinting against summer light coming through the back door. Both of them clearly mid-conversation about something that mattered. Savannah sitting in a booth during a break, reading a paperback with the focused attention of someone who reads because they need to. In every photograph, she was entirely herself, present and unguarded, the way people are when they forget the camera or have decided it doesn't matter. Beneath the photographs, tied with kitchen twine into a bundle, were envelopes. Cora lifted them out. Each one was addressed in Edmund's careful handwriting. The name on every envelope was Savannah. The address below the name was the diner's own address. Return address, the same. Letters written to someone who had already left. Addressed to the place where they had last been together, because there was nowhere else to send them. And he had written them anyway, year after year. Because some things need to be said even when there is no way to say them to the right person. She didn't open them. They were not hers to open. They were her mother's, and her mother was beyond receiving them. But the fact of them was its own message. The 20 years of them, the stack of them tied with kitchen twine, all of that was what she needed to know. At the bottom of the box was a sheet of paper folded once with her name on the outside. Cora and Nora, in the handwriting she now knew as well as her own. Nora saw it at the same moment Cora did. She reached in and lifted it out with both hands and looked at her sister. Cora nodded. Nora unfolded it and read aloud, her voice steady in the way it was steady when she was applying steadiness to it deliberately, using the skills she had spent 14 years developing. Dear Cora and Nora, if you are reading this, then my plan worked, and you found your way home. I knew your mother for one summer. It was enough. She was kind and strong and full of a light that this place needed, and that I did not know it needed until she brought it. When she left, I told myself she had made the right choice, that she had somewhere better to be, that the world would be good to her. I have spent 20 years not being entirely able to make myself believe that. When I learned she was gone, I thought that was the end of the story. Then I learned about you, and I understood that it wasn't. I tried everything I could think of to find you. The system is built to keep children safe, and it does this partly by keeping them beyond reach of people looking in from the outside, and I ran out of time to find my way through it, so I did the only thing left. I trusted the $5 in the faith and the fact that some things have a way of finding each other if you give them the room to. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. This place was built for you, even though I did not know your names when I was building it. Your mother would be so proud of you. She was proud of everything she loved, and she loved fiercely and completely and without holding anything back. And I know she loved you the same way she loved everything, which is to say entirely and without conditions. Welcome home. With all the love I have left to give, Edmund. Nora folded the letter when she finished and held it in her lap. She didn't try to say anything. Cora put her arm around her sister. Garrett and Clara stood quietly at the counter. The diner held them all in its cleaned and patient space, the winter light coming clean through the windows, the chrome on the stools catching it, the booths holding their familiar shadows. 6 months later, on an evening in late May, when the light lasted until 9, and the mountains to the west caught the last of it and held it longer than the valley, Cora stood in the parking lot of Hale's Diner and watched the sign come on. The neon had been repaired by a man from Billings who had driven 3 hours because Garrett had called in a favor, and because the man had heard the story through the particular channels that stories travel in small counties and had wanted to be part of it in some small way. The new tubes followed the original layout exactly, the same lettering Edmund had chosen in 1978, the same clean lines and proportions. Hale's Diner, and beneath it, the secondary line that had been dark for 15 years. Open 24 hours. Both lines lit, both holding steady. Below the main sign mounted to the post at eye level, a small rectangular plaque in brushed bronze. Established 1978 by Edmund Hale. Reopened 2024 by Cora and Nora Sinclair. Cars had been arriving since 5 o'clock. The lot was fuller than Cora had ever seen it, fuller probably than it had been in years. Trucks and sedans and one ancient station wagon she recognized as belonging to Vivian Marsh, who had reportedly told 3 separate people in town that nothing short of a genuine medical emergency was going to keep her away from the reopening of a diner she had been eating at since 1981. Inside, Clara was behind the counter in the position she had occupied for 15 years before the doors closed, moving with the particular fluency of someone who has returned to something they were always meant to be doing and knows it. Garrett was in the first booth with 2 men his age who had been coming to this diner since before any of them had gray hair. The Hartwell family occupied the large corner booth, the children coloring on paper placemats Nora had designed and had printed at the copy shop in town. Nora herself was moving through the dining room with the coffee pot, refilling cups, stopping to talk to people with the ease of someone who has discovered that this is the thing they are for, making whoever was in front of her feel like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Cora watched her and thought about what Clara had said about their mother, about the way she made people feel that way, and she thought, there it is. There it continues. Generation to generation, not as imitation but as inheritance, as something true that keeps being true in new people. Nora's breathing was clear and even. The medication, funded by donations that had come in after the story of the storm shelter spread through the county, and then beyond it, in the way that certain stories travel because they say something people need said, had changed things so completely that Cora sometimes still stopped in the middle of what she was doing just to listen to her sister breathe, to notice the absence of the whistle that had been the background of their shared life for years, to feel the absence of it as the gift it was. Sylvia arrived at 6, parking a sensible sedan rather than the dark SUV, coming in wearing jeans and a sweater and carrying a folder which she set on the counter in front of Cora without ceremony or preamble. Inside the folder were the incorporation documents for the Savannah Sinclair Memorial Fund, filed with the Custer County Clerk's office, the same office where Winifred Yates had handed over a manila envelope 7 months ago to 2 girls with garbage bags. The fund's stated purpose was providing medical and educational assistance to children in the Montana foster care system. Sylvia had seeded it with $50,000 from her own accounts. My grandfather spent 40 years trying to give something back to this community, she said. I figure I have a certain amount of catching up to do. Owen was there too, at the end of the counter, and he raised his coffee cup to Cora in a small toast that she returned with a nod, because some understandings are complete without requiring more than that. As the evening settled into itself and the diner filled with the noise and warmth and the smell of coffee and food and people who were glad to be together somewhere that meant something, Cora moved through all of it and felt the particular texture of a life that had arrived somewhere real. Not a life without difficulty or uncertainty. The mortgage on the repairs was real. The licensing requirements were real. The work a diner required every day before it opened and after it closed was very real. And she and Nora were learning it in the way you learn things that matter, incrementally and not always gracefully, and with the knowledge that getting better was not only possible, but certain. But the floor was solid, the walls were straight, the sign outside was lit. Later, when the last customers had gone and Nora was working through the closing checklist she had made for herself on a yellow legal pad, and Clara was washing the final cups, and Garrett was telling the story of the first time he'd eaten here in 1974, a story he had told before, and that was entirely fine and would be told again. Cora sat at the counter and opened Edmund's journal to the last entry. She had read it many times. She would read it many more. She read it again now in the quiet of the diner with the sign outside, holding its light against the Montana dark. If you are reading this, you found the basement. I don't know who you are. I don't know how you came to own this place. But if you are reading these words, then you are the person I have been waiting for. She closed the journal. She looked around the diner, the booths and the counter and the windows and the door that opened outward onto a parking lot where people arrived not knowing quite what they would find and left having found something they would come back for. She thought about $5, about 2,000 miles, about a bus terminal at 2:47 in the morning, and a cracked phone screen and a listing at the bottom of a county auction page that nobody else had wanted for 14 days, and that had been waiting, patient as concrete, steady as a generator running through the worst storm in 30 years, for the right thumb to press the right button. She thought about what it meant that she had pressed it, not the legal meaning or the financial meaning, the other meaning. The one that had been building in a basement under a diner in Montana for 40 years. Accumulation upon accumulation of preparation and faith. Certain in the way that things are certain when they have been built with love over a very long time by someone who believed the right person would eventually come. Some things know where they are going, even when the people involved don't. Some inheritances travel sideways and skip time because they are looking for the right hands rather than the nearest ones. Some doors are built decades before the person who will open them is born, and they wait and they hold. And when the right person finally arrives with a $5 bill and a decision that makes no practical sense, the lock turns on the first try because it was always going to. Nora turned off the kitchen lights. Clara said her goodnights with the warmth of someone who has found her way back to the place she belongs. Garrett's truck started in the parking lot, that familiar engine making its familiar complaints, and then the sound of it faded down the old highway toward town, and it was quiet. Cora sat at the counter for a while in the quiet and let it be what it was. Then she got up and checked the locks and turned off the last interior light and stepped outside into the cool May evening. The mountains were dark shapes against a sky full of stars, the density of stars you only get far from cities, the kind of sky that makes you feel appropriately small and appropriately significant at the same time, both things true together without contradiction. The sign above her held its light against the dark. She stood under it for a moment. She thought about Edmund, who had built it and lit it and turned it off and left it dark for 15 years and trusted that someone would come to turn it on again. She thought about her mother, who had stood somewhere near this spot 20 years ago and felt, for one summer, like she was somewhere she belonged. She thought about Nora inside, breathing clear and easy, doing the closing checklist on a yellow legal pad in a diner that was theirs. She thought about $5. She thought about what $5 had bought. Then she went inside because there was work to do in the morning, and she had learned from a man she never met that the work was the point, that the work and the people the work was for were the whole point, and that a life organized around that understanding was not a small life, regardless of how it looked from outside, or how it had started, or how unlikely it had been at every stage that it would arrive at this particular evening in this particular place. The sign stayed on, open 24 hours. It always would be.